guess we're ready to kick it off then, aren't we?
Great to meet you. Yeah, I feel like I've known you guys for a while.
Right. I'm chatting to Ash Mahmood today of the film Playing God.
Yes.
So thank you, Ash, for coming a very long way.
No problem at all.
Yes. So I just want to find out more about the film. I've just watched it, and it was absolutely brilliant. It was so simply done and so powerful and so emotive. Tell me a little bit about it.
So Playing God was meant to look at this idea of democide. Mm-hmm. So that was basically suggesting that the state actually, state policy is causing the death of human beings. Mm-hmm. Particularly, we focused on the NHS, and we looked at it not just in light of the last few years in terms of the COVID narrative, but that this actually was happening prior to COVID as well, that there were historical cases. And to me, it just felt as if there was some kind of experimentation going on. Mm-hmm. And I would go as far as to say that it felt very much like some kind of eugenics activity, to be honest. And in the film, we've only got space to it for 5 people, bereaved family members who lost their loved ones in the NHS. But we could have had many, many, many more people, and so many others have come forward to talk to me or to the producer, one of the driving forces behind the film, Jackie Devoy. Yeah. And she's got a big support group that she takes care of and gives a voice to a lot of people who lost loved ones, particularly from the cocktail of drugs, midazolam and morphine. So she made a film called A Good Death, which looked at some of these cases. And we teamed up together. It was by chance because I was interviewing people who'd lost their loved ones through actually midazolam and morphine as well. Mm-hmm. Not in COVID times, but in 2016, for example, when they said that this Liverpool care pathway, which is what they called it, had stopped, but it was still going on. So these people that I was interviewing were people that Jackie had also interviewed, but I think they were not used in her film in the end. Mm-hmm. And so we were brought together through these common people. And we talked about making a film where we expanded, not just looking at COVID or not just looking at one type of medication or just looking at jabs, but looking at other things as well to show that this is happening across the board with various types of medications. And it wasn't, as I said, it wasn't really difficult to find. I didn't go looking for this. I realized from the very beginning when the COVID narrative came about that it was, sadly for me, it was very laughable. Not obviously, I felt great sympathy for the people who were caught up in it, but for me, just the whole narrative was so ridiculous. Mm. You know, things like masks. I couldn't see any reason why anyone would wear one. I certainly didn't feel comfortable when people were trying to enforce that on my face. It reminded me of Guantanamo Bay, the prisoners who were subjected to wearing those masks. And of course, that was not for health purposes. So everything was just quite wrong for me. And then you started to see how people's lives were getting affected by this. People were in isolation. Yeah. People were in care homes and they were not allowed, families were not allowed to see their loved ones who were in care homes. Many other families had stopped visiting their friends and family as well. So mothers were not seeing their daughters, or grandmothers, grandfathers weren't visiting their grandchildren, and people were staying in isolation. And that was quite shocking to me. And many other people were unable to keep their businesses open because they were forced to shut down. So all of these things really concerned me. So I went, I tried to find any people who were perhaps thinking the same way as me. And it was very difficult to find anyone, really, to be honest.
Yeah.
A lot of confusion, I understand. In the beginning, people were quite confused and treading very carefully, not sure what was going on. But thankfully, my family, my mum, my brother, and my father, they were not going along with it. So that was quite nice to connect with them again and see that they were not following this. And then I saw that there was a gentleman on Twitter who ran a toy shop, and it was that Christmas time, the lockdown at Christmas, and he said he's going to keep his toy shop open. So I knew a group of friends and their children who were willing to hang out, I suppose. So we said, well, let's take the kids there and get some toys.
Yeah.
And he'll give a 10% discount for anyone who doesn't wear a mask. So yeah, some of my friends were wearing a mask, but at least when they went into the toy shop, they were very happy that they could take their masks off. So it wasn't that they really wanted to wear it, but they just felt they didn't want to cause any concern to anybody else. It's again that whole idea of doing it for the greater good.
Yeah.
So they didn't really want to wear it. So when they went in the toy shop and they could take it off, they were all very happy. And yeah, we got the 10% discount. And I thought that this person's story needs to be documented. So I'd finally found someone who was defying the lockdowns and keeping his shop open against the wishes of the council. So I recorded a testimony with him because these stories weren't coming out at all. So I thought we need some kind of historic record of people who think the way I do, at least, because it just, as I said, felt so wrong to force people to go into house arrest and to isolate them and make them afraid and tell them that your loved ones are going to die. Everyone's going to know someone's loved one who's going to die. I mean, it's not something you ever say. And I remember talking to my dad about it. He said he remembers the Hong Kong flu, which he said was quite, well, according to the newspapers, it was really bad because 64,000 people died in 1968 in the UK. But he said that he remembers seeing nothing really in the newspaper. So they didn't frighten you about it. And they didn't tell you that, you're all going to die or someone you know is going to die. So from that first testimony, I put it on YouTube. It was taken down straight away. And to be honest, if you listen to it now, this gentleman called Bruce, who ran the toy shop, if you hear his testimony, he was still pretty mainstream, actually. He just complained about the masks and his mental health and not being able to keep his shop open. So from that testimony, I found some other people as well who were having concerns about their business being forced to shut down. And so I interviewed my sister-in-law, and she broke down in tears because, all her dreams were getting shattered. And it just, she was very upset about it. And then slowly it built into something a bit more regular. So I started finding a lot of other people who were concerned. And then it took me in a direction which I never expected, which was a man put me in touch with a lady whose mother had died from midazolam and morphine cocktail in 2016. And through her, again, she put me in touch with other people who had historic cases of death through the NHS practices and policies and medications. And one was going back to 1978.
Yeah.
So this was a lady that I was given the contact for, called Joan, and she was about 88 at the time. And she wanted her story to be told because the truth had never been told. She'd been promised so many times that the truth will come out, and the BBC or a particular mainstream newspaper would report on the case, but it was never the truth. The truth never came out. And she had all the evidence. She showed me all the evidence about her daughter, who died in 1978, aged 13.
Right. I remember the one in the film. Yeah,
in the film.
Yeah.
So I just felt quite moved and very suddenly felt a duty of responsibility that she has entrusted me to put her story out. So I went down to Poole to interview her. And it was about an hour and a half because she had so much to talk about. And it was just really important and felt really moved that this person had come to me to tell her story. And this was 44 years later.
Yeah.
And so she presented me with very damning evidence. One was the Sanofi letter that admitted that this drug, Epilim, had caused the death of her daughter. And she'd been misdiagnosed with epilepsy. And so that person who put me in touch with Joan is called Anne, and she's also in the film. And it took Anne a very, very long time. So she was putting me in touch with other people, but it took her a very long time to tell her story. And her story's also historic. It was in 2001, and it was a sort of systematic abuse of her baby until she finally...
That was harrowing.
Very harrowing.
Yeah.
And these people are so traumatized. I mean, we're still in touch, and they contact me a lot, and they just haven't had the truth come out. And just when they thought, I think in Anne's case, what's really painful is that she had her whole, the life of Elizabeth, her daughter, was completely covered up. The death of, life and death of her daughter was completely covered up for about 17 years. It's only because they were suspicious about the whole treatment of their daughter that they started to investigate themselves. If they hadn't done, which most people don't, you just trust your consultant, you trust your doctors.
Why wouldn't you?
Why wouldn't you? You coroners, you would trust everybody because you think they know best, isn't it? And they're supposed to be the pillars of the community, the pillars of society. I remember as a kid growing up, our doctor was like a member of the extended family because he'd come to your house and he knew everybody's name, and he always looked like he was the one that you would turn to for help, and seemed really nice. So here was this very tragic case, and they decided to pursue, and then they believed in and trusted other people who's promised to tell the truth. And it went right up to Parliament level.
Yes.
So you had Jeremy Hunt commission a report to uncover the truth. And what made it even more painful for the family, for Anne and her husband Graham, is that they trusted these people to tell and present the truth. And what they got was another cover-up. And I think that traumatized them all over again, and they had to relive it, and they felt completely betrayed. And it's just extremely sad and moving. I mean, we're talking about babies and children here, and these people have never recovered, and they can't grieve.
Yeah.
You know, I think with the case of Joan, they had it's really, really horrendous because she couldn't have a proper burial because body parts of her daughter were in 5 different. Yes, and so this is so dark and so evil. It was. I'm almost lost for words thinking about it.
What piqued your interest in all of this in the first place? Because was this something within your remit when you first started talking to people at the beginnings of the lot? Had you decided, I want to do podcasts, I want to start talking to people? Were you interested in it medically, or what made you be one of those people that said, I'm going to do something and this is what I'm going to do?
Well, I was a filmmaker before, so I had a lot of equipment, but I just felt so alone initially. I remember that mandates of the masks, and I remember going into the train in London and walking through all the carriages, just seeing if there was anyone else that was not wearing one, and I didn't find anybody. At that time, I didn't yet know what my family's position on this whole thing was either, so I felt very alone, and I had a family as well, my son, obviously his mother as well, so friends, and so I just felt that this is all wrong. Every aspect of it was wrong. So I just felt compelled to document what was going on. And the more I learned, the more I realized that nearly everything, if not everything that we've been told, is a pack of lies. So I didn't intentionally go searching for these people. These people found me, but I guess I was putting out the energy probably without subconsciously realizing that this is where I was going. I think all my life I've always wanted to tell the truth because I knew there were scandals. I knew there was a lot of lies everywhere in all institutions and places and corruption. I worked in the film industry as well, and I always thought it was a very dark industry. Well, I personally experienced a lot of darkness in that world. A lot of corruption, a lot of promises,
Mm.
a lot of lies, a lot of really sinister stuff. So I knew this stuff went on. I remember filming for Notting Hill Housing Trust, which on the face of it's a wonderful organisation that helps to subsidise the rents for very poorer and marginalised communities.
Mhm.
So I was doing some promotional work for them very happily because I thought they do good work. My mum lives in a Notting Hill Housing Trust
Yeah.
accommodation herself. They've been good to her, and they were a man who had some grievance about.
Mhm.
He was a resident and had some grievance about the organisation, and I decided that I would use his grievance and put it in the film
Yeah.
because 9 other people we'd interviewed and they'd all said lovely things about it. And I said, well, we'll put yours in, and then that way Notting Hill Housing can hear what you're saying
Yeah.
and rectify the issue or at least look into it.
Mhm.
And they said, oh, we can't use this. And I said, why not? They said, oh, because this is a promotional film and he's being quite negative about the organisation.
Yeah.
And then for me, that just felt completely wrong. And I remember trying to do everything I could to get it into the film. And then they said, oh, if you don't cooperate, then you won't get paid. And it's this is a small example, but these kind of things always troubled me, that you can't really get the truth out easily. There's always an agenda.
Yeah.
And I've seen that with, obviously, before that with the whole 9/11 and the Iraq war and dodgy dossiers. And these things, when you start looking into it more carefully, they happen a lot. There's a lot of injustice in the world. I've experienced a lot of it myself, a lot of hypocrisy. And so I suppose the COVID narrative really it's just like now it's so clear in front of me. And the more I went in, the more it just grew in terms of the horrors and in terms of the inversions, I think.
Mm.
And so, yeah, it was almost, I mean, we say it's an accident, but I think nothing really is by accident.
Yeah. I think for a lot of us in these movements, we're all we've obviously put out the energy and we found our unique niches. Seems to happen, with a lot of people.
Yes.
Is obviously this latest one is specifically on the medical side of it. Is that the avenue that you're going to pursue, or are you still looking at all the different aspects of injustices in the world?
Yes, I think at the moment it seems to be, there are so many injustices. There's military injustices, there's corporate, there's so many, isn't it? I suppose the medical one has just been the big one of the last 4 years.
Yes.
Obviously now we know it's been happening for a very long time. But it's just, yes, I think the medical industrial complex is a very serious and very, well, we say powerful. I don't think really they're that powerful, but it's just that people give their power to them.
Yes.
We call pharma big pharma, so we're already saying that they're very big, but really, they're only big in that by their own narrative and by convincing everyone that they know best because they've hidden so much knowledge from us. So I think it's just at the moment, the medical side is where people are approaching me to talk about. So there's other things that people have come forward, such as the fact that even in 2024, and we're told now that this whole COVID vaccine, or not vaccine, injection is now no longer on the schedule, but they're still giving it to vulnerable people.
Yeah.
You see, against the wishes of their parents.
Yeah.
And they call the place where they make these decisions, they call it the Court of Protection, and the names they give these places. It's I'm just thinking as a parent, I mean, you're a parent and I'm a parent, and you think as a mother, you carry that child and you've nurtured them lovingly throughout their lives, and they happen to be vulnerable. Maybe they can't, someone has to advocate for them, but you'd always think that would be the loving parents, not the state, interfering. And especially now in 2024, when everybody knows someone who's been harmed potentially by these jabs. So many people keep coming forward every day, even people who followed the narrative to the T.
Yeah.
And so you think, my God, this is still going on. And I think there's something always very sinister because the vulnerable always seem to be thrown under the bus first. This whole mess started with the vulnerable. They said, we're not going to jab the children initially, they said. and but they were jabbing the children. They said the vulnerable children will be jabbed.
It's sinister.
Yeah, very sinister. And then you had these boards. I remember a placard that was given to me at one of the marches that I went on, the freedom rallies, and it said, "Healthy children don't need a jab." And I thought to myself, but neither do vulnerable people. Neither do people with learning difficulties.
Yeah.
If you're more vulnerable to, you might even be more at risk to an experimental product.
Absolutely.
You see, and this happened to me. This happened in Nazi Germany as well. So I know that I came across a lady called Vera Sharav. You might have come across her, and this is a survivor of the Holocaust. And if she's drawing parallels between what she saw happening now and what happened during her childhood, you have to listen. And through her, I came across a film called Racial Hygiene.
Yeah.
And this really stunned me because it looked at people who'd been euthanized pre-1939 mainly. So in the early, when the Nazis first came to power in 1933, they were euthanized using eugenics laws, because a lot of European countries had eugenics laws, and many American states had eugenics laws. And there was a lot of investment in psychiatry because they were trying to find conditions to label people as. So there was a person who spoke in the film Racial Hygiene who said they asked him questions like, what's the difference between a ladder and stairs? And he couldn't explain that. He was a child at the time. And so they gave him the label of being feeble-minded, and they sterilized him. And so there was a lot of sterilization going on. Now, none of this came out in the Nuremberg trials. And it seems to me that this wasn't revealed because so many countries across Europe were involved having eugenics laws in place. So this was never really brought to the courts. You know, how many people died, we'll never know during that regime's occupancy. But it couldn't have just been the 20 doctors who were found guilty. All the corporations, they continued, they changed the names.
Yeah.
So many people just carried on. And so I watched that film, Racial Hygiene. It's really well worth watching. And you got the testimonies of those people who were either themselves sterilized or bereaved family members who had family members euthanized. And their story was, some of their stories have still not come out. That's what was evident. And some that did they were told in 2007, the German government finally recognized some of these people who had been sterilized or euthanized. That's like 74 years later.
Yeah.
So it's always the case. We now have this infected blood scandal.
I've spoken to the lovely gentleman in Australia who's fighting against that, because in Australia they're not getting the compensation like they are here. And that's,
This is experimentation, because they knew, isn't it, that it was contaminated.
Absolutely.
And they were, again, messing around with really vulnerable children, you know, and nearly all of them died.
Yeah.
And we're talking about, I think it was over 6,000 people. And again, 40 years later, when all the potential criminals are either dead or unfit to stand trial.
In fact, my husband actually, one of his friends when he was younger was a haemophiliac, and he got infected blood and died of hepatitis C.
Very sorry to hear.
So, you know, it's, we've seen it firsthand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So much is just hidden, isn't it? That's the problem, you see.
Yeah.
They don't tell us people just talk about obviously the COVID jabs because they've caused so much destruction, but there was HPV, was an awful jab as well. They're now offering it to boys.
Yes.
So they're just expanding the sort of this mass medication. I had spoke to a young lady who had the MMR jab not just a couple of months ago and collapsed and fell ill, was blind for several days as one of the symptoms, and she recovered so far. And so it's not just this one jab, and we know that a lot of the old injections as well, they had things like aluminium, which is known to sit in the body, very difficult for the body to get rid of it. And a lot of it's absorbed in bones because you've got a lot of old cells in the bones, and you have a lot of memory cells that don't regenerate, they stay. And a lot of this aluminium accumulates there. And there was a gentleman here, I think he was known as Mr. Aluminium because he did a lot of research on it. I can't remember his name, Christopher Exley.
Right.
And he's recently had his funding cut. Well, first he had his funding cut I think he was at Keele University, and now he's completely been pushed out. So, you just can't find the people to speak out. Although he's done 200, he's looked at 200 brains during his career anyway. So the data's there already, and they found a lot of aluminium in the brain, and they related it to certain vaccines which use aluminium quite a lot.
Yeah,
which shouldn't have any place in the body at all.
No, absolutely. One of the things I really liked that you did in your film, which I think is so powerful, you're talking about the previous problems with the health service or health services, is that you've highlighted not just the COVID vaccine, but you took a mixture of people with historic problems, and that I think is so important, because we're assuming that the problems with the COVID vaccine are, this is a medical problem. Oh my goodness, this has all happened. And it's, even though the infected blood scandal is going on at the moment, I don't think people are necessarily correlating that with, well, we've had this harm and we've had this harm and now we've got this harm. The stories that you tell within there, the two ladies with the children, going back 50 years, it's so powerful. And you said you're just scratching the surface with those two, that there are so many more.
Yes.
This is what needs to be coming out more, that this isn't a new thing. This is something on a bigger scale.
Yeah.
But actually the harms of all these other medications. I mean, we need to be looking at all these different medications and looking retrospectively to see what has actually gone on with everything. I mean, obviously this is something I'm passionate about with the control group, but it's looking at everything, really. I think we need to revisit every aspect of the big medication, big pharma, or whatever we want to call it. Maybe we need to reduce the name down to something insignificant now.
Yes. I mean, Sanofi's still continuing, isn't it? That's the drug that the drug manufacturer who produced this drug, Epilim.
Yeah.
And there, I was looking at a box yesterday of codeine, and that was manufactured by Sanofi. And Sanofi has historic ties to Nazi Germany as well. It wasn't called Sanofi at the time. I can't remember the name of the drug company. I know it amalgamated into other things. There are a lot of questions, isn't it? And I think you want to expand this, because it's also unfair to forget. We mustn't forget about these other historic cases, you see. And also it's to show that it's not always, end of life drugs are not always just given to people of a certain age. I think in the film we had a man who was only 54 years old who was put on this pathway.
My husband had the same thing. So he ended up in hospital with COVID.
Very sorry to hear.
Obviously he's survived and he's absolutely fine.
Yes.
But when he was in, and that was 2 years ago now, he had got into a very bad state. We lived in a mouldy house at the time. He was under a lot of stress. And had previously had pneumonia. So I personally believe that it was a whole combination of things that made him get very sick. He was put on a COVID ward, tested for COVID. I was then told that he needed to be ventilated. He was offered a DNR. He's 52.
Yes, I met him. He's a fine young man. Yes.
Yeah, and he was offered. Well, I'm not sure. He's not clear if he was offered midazolam, but he said everyone was being given these drugs out like sweeties. He refused. Although he was very ill, we had a very clear list of you can take this, you can take this, you do not take this, and they have to ring me for anything else. So we refused ventilation, even though they said he needed it. We refused, and he had BPAP instead. He didn't have the midazolam. He had antibiotics, and I snuck ivermectin in. Managed to get that in. I was so grateful to people in this community, because I was able to get ivermectin in. And actually, he was absolutely fine, got out really quickly, has no health problem, no long COVID or anything like that.
Yes.
Absolutely fine. But only 52, and yet they wanted to put him on the Liverpool pathway.
Yeah.
They would have ventilated him and killed him, I'm sure.
Yes, because we've seen the damage that the ventilation did.
Yeah.
We saw it in Italy, isn't it, before it even arrived here?
Yeah.
It was already known that this ventilation. I spoke to a doctor. I'm not obviously a medical person by any stretch of the imagination, but I spoke to Dr. Kevin Corbett.
Yes.
Who was from the very beginning, was actually out on the streets.
Yeah.
Speaking out from the very beginning. And he said, you don't just put people on ventilators who are able to walk around. And that's what they were doing. It's not something you just willy-nilly do, and they were doing that. Obviously, the excuse is there that, oh, we were very afraid, or, you know, that this thing would spread, so we had to go for it. But, you know, but people, medical professionals know that you don't just electively ventilate people. And the data was emerging that this ventilation was causing so much harm. And yet here they were some years later, in your husband's case, still trying to ventilate him. But it's knowing, isn't it? It's because we know.
Yes.
It's not that we say we're refusing everything. It's just that we want to know what's going on, what they're planning to do to us. We've got to have some knowledge so that we can take responsibility for our own health. Because I had a frozen shoulder myself, and it's very scary, because when you're in that much pain, you're very vulnerable.
Yeah.
I couldn't sleep at night for a week, and I couldn't move my shoulder, and all they were offering was painkiller, and it's very easy to take that codeine. It's very easy. And then when you take codeine, you have other side effects. So they give you other drugs. Yeah. I think they gave me omeprazole, and they offered me one other drug as well. And I remember asking the GP, he was a nice chap, to be honest. He was, because they were trying to make me wear a mask, and he was wearing one. And when he saw that I was refusing, he took his off as well and was happy to see me. So that was quite nice. He was a nice chap, but he said, I thought he was joking when I said, because he said, you've got to take this as a laxative, this medication. I can't remember the name of it. And I said, could I not take prunes for that? He said, I don't know nothing about prunes. I thought he was joking, but he was dead serious. He didn't know anything about the laxative effect of prunes. So, so they don't know too much. So I contacted Kevin again, and it's great to know these people, like you said, in the community is fantastic. And he said, have you seen, because they were offering me a steroid injection. Yeah. He said, have you seen on the Cochrane study how ineffective and how deadly steroid injections are? They don't help, and they're very toxic. And he said, go and see this osteopath. He gave me a contact. I didn't straight away contact him because I'm in so much turmoil. But then he messaged me and quite angrily said, have you contacted Phil yet? Because I was asking him all sorts of other questions. He said, have you contacted Phil yet? And then on Wednesday, I went to see this gentleman called Phil, fantastic osteopath. He did some work on my shoulder, and I was cured. No pain within that 45 minutes, no pain. And I could move my arm again. And I've had no problem ever since. And then you really realize that, the medical profession, if you don't know any better, you're very vulnerable, because this is all they've been taught. And it's very clear that they haven't been given the right information. I don't think it's the case that, the people, individuals are the issue. I think it's the system, and the people running the system who are giving all the wrong information and indoctrinating doctors, nurses into long training and telling them this is the way, not teaching them about, holistic things, the fact that our body is very holistic, that our oral health plays such a big role in all sorts of other issues in our body, the fact that we have fillings made of amalgam fillings made of mercury that's still permitted, the fact they want to medicate the entire British population with fluoride in the water, that this is against the Nuremberg Code, and they can go and do it because people are quite ignorant. We just don't know very much, but we sit on a very high horse. It's just it has been the British nature that we know best. You see it, people go, we went to Japan. I remember when we moved to Japan with a group of British people, and they were like, these Japanese people don't know what they're talking about. We need fluoride in our water. They haven't got it here. They haven't got fluoride in their toothpaste. That's why they got this tooth decay. Look at them. And it's like we always think we know best. And actually what you start to learn is that actually perhaps our ancestors knew a lot more than we did. And they weren't just painting their faces blue and running around like primitive characters. They probably far more civilized than we were. And they realized the power of the earth. They realized the power of the soul. They realized that we are great healers. I mean, I think about it, when we cut ourselves or a woman falls pregnant, the body already knows exactly what to do without anyone. There's no book. It just does everything for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if we give it a chance and try to understand what it's trying to do and realize our own powers, then I think that the problems can be solved if we can spend time and meditate to try to understand who we are. But what happens is we're not allowed to, because straight away everything's external. It's all Disney, it's all colours, it's this and that, and stimulation externally, and straight into school now. I mean, 2 years old children are getting behaviour reports. I think it was 1.5 or 2 years old now, and it's getting earlier and earlier that parents are leaving their children to the care of others. But it's not the right kind of care. It's all very regimented and data driven. And, you know, we got in schools now software that's called, like, you know, surveillance software, and it's monitoring how many times a child goes to the toilet.
Really?
Yeah, all sorts of stuff like that.
Oh my goodness.
You know, have they been to the medical room? So they're gathering all this data. You know, they're treating them like products. You know, in schools, I think schools are so sinister because they're like the testing ground. I think they were the testing ground for Operation Moonshot, which they planned to do to the whole country, which was to get everyone tested. And that would have kept lots of people, because there's so many false positives.
Yeah.
Now we know they're probably all ridiculous, but that would have kept so many people who were totally healthy, believing they were unhealthy, having to stay home and isolate for weeks, not getting paid often, because if you're sent home, people are not always paid. And just ostracized and treated like pariahs of society, toxic disease carriers. And this was happening in schools. They used, I think, Operation Moonshot in schools because they were testing everyone. The kids couldn't turn their heads around because they said, oh, if you turn your head around and then you're spreading this, you've got to wear the mask for 8 hours. So kids were really tortured, I think, and abused. They were shouted at, don't turn your head around. 2 meters apart, they were wearing lanyards around their neck with color code so that they could be in bubbles. It was so much abuse of children. Whereas, you know, I remember some people filmed the Department of Education. They barged in to demand a meeting with the Education Secretary. Of course, he was nowhere to be found. But they filmed that none of the Department of Education staff were wearing masks.
Yeah, exactly.
Yet the kids were expected to wear them for 8 years, shouted at and given detentions for not complying. And then hundreds of them were sent home. Because if this child had been in the vicinity of another child, so the whole year group was sent home, and then they would get another test from their NHS service that would come back as negative. And so 4 days of their lives disrupted, believing that they're ill, isolating because they don't want to make their grandmother or relative ill, and then 4 days later back at school. And this whole disruption, and then suddenly they're saying, oh, the only solution and the way out of this, so it's all set up for this, to stop this disruption and all this illness. No one was really ill, but they were just getting ill because they were so afraid. And then, we can only open the schools if all the people are vaccinated. So you have teachers saying, we've got to get the kids vaccinated. It's the only way. Or, well, if my daughter could get vaccinated, she's 6 years old, you know, I would do it next week. I'll do it tomorrow. Hurry up and just get the age down to so that I can get my daughter vaccinated so she can go back to school. And it's just upside down, isn't it? The whole thinking became
do you
upside
think
down.
that the reason, part of the reason all of this has been able to happen is that the communities that we used to have been broken apart. We no longer have the aunties, the uncles, the grandparents, the elder women in the village who would be the surrogate aunties, those people with the older knowledge who would say to you, oh, don't be silly, it's only a cold. Oh, don't be silly, it's only a cut, put a bit of something on it. Oh, you know, have a bit of cod liver oil. We've lost all of those people that we used to trust for our information. And instead, we've been given this government who don't know us personally, who have no information about us, who don't care about us as an individual. They just have an overview of a population. And they've got a protocol for a population, not an individual for an individual cure for an individual. And so because we've been pulled out and put in front of TVs, put in front of screens, taught to trust that. These people who don't give a damn about us, instead of those people around us who actually really care for us, who have old knowledge.
Yes, it's taken, as you make such a great point, and I think you've hit the nail on the head, really, because you can see it in our own lives. Divorces and people not getting wanting to commit to living together. And you hear in different cultures as well, it's not just a problem for the UK or even the West, it's happening across the world. You hear these concepts of baby father, and there's this father who doesn't live with the children, and he's got multiple children from different relationships, and he's got no time to care for them. And now the mothers have no time to care for their children. Everybody's geared towards work, and they've become slaves to the corporation. They think they were, you're a slave to your husband at home. But what you then become is a slave to the corporation. That's all the trick, isn't it? That drive to get everyone into work, to help the corporation, not help the individual. And yes, the whole thing has been broken up, isn't it? That grandparents used to live in the same household, aunties, friends, and everybody was a community.
Everyone cared for you and your family.
Yes, everybody cared. And they always said that it takes a village to bring up and educate a child.
Yeah.
And that's fallen by the wayside, isn't it? That's the crucial thing, that knowledge. Remember, we still have some of it. It's also broken up with my parents' family as well, because they're from Pakistan, but they've embraced the Western ideals. They're all, they work for Procter and Gamble. All of my mum's family, they're from a generation above me. I can't really look up to them. I see them as actually, sort of cult COVIDian followers. They were saying, here's to good health, with a picture of Pfizer behind. And, saying that Rumi, the great spiritual leader, Rumi would have taken the jab and wore a mask. And it's just, they completely inverted what Rumi was all about. And he took the jab, and 2 weeks later, my uncle had a heart attack. So I can't even turn to that generation. I can't even say that people who were born in Pakistan, who had perhaps, because Pakistan's a little bit behind in terms of the West, where they still have a bit more of that family structure. But not in my mum's family's case, because they've really become westernized. They really have gone. I mean, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with the West. When I say westernized, what I mean is they've taken the technocracy side of it.
Yeah,
and they've fallen for all that modernization and materialism. And so you can't turn to those people, and they've gone off to America and traveled over there. Others have gone elsewhere, and their families have broken up as well. And so it's hitting everybody. But I do remember when I was there, I spent a bit of time there. And I went to more rural places.
Yeah.
And that's where the communities still have held quite strong. And so, yes, you see in the whole village that there's a teacher, and the teacher teaches all the kids in the village all together, and he knows everybody, all the
on
students
an individual
basis. And it used to be like that here, I think. Remember Dr. Shaw, our GP, used to know all, as I said, knew all of us. And my teacher used to drop us home. He actually would give us a lift, drop us home. And there was nothing at all wrong in that, really. It was not, 99 or even more times out of 100, people are very good, and they do things for the good. And so we all knew each other. He knew my dad. He knew my dad worked at the market, and he'd come and tell my dad if I was having some difficulty, he would speak to my dad. So my dad would learn a lot about what was going on. And that was part of the community. It wasn't his professional hat. It was his community hat.
Yeah.
And you knew your local youth club, and they knew where you lived. And it was very much more a trusting society. But I think with the big news stories and the hidden agenda, they've tried to divide us by saying, oh, you can't trust anybody. Everybody's terrible. Anyone could be a terrorist. Anyone could be a disease carrier.
Yeah. Or a paedophile.
Or a paedophile. And we know that that's not the case. And we can't live our lives like that. Yes, of course, there are some terrible people, but that's still very few and far between. But the way they portray it is that, anybody next to you could be a paedophile or a terrorist or a disease spreader.
And the mechanisms they put in place actually ensure that happens.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, we want safety measures.
Of course.
But then safety measures go too far. I mean, stupid things like teachers at school aren't allowed to put sun cream on the children because they're not allowed to touch the child. When does it, it's really hard now to say where that line has been crossed. Do we want that line there, or do we want it there? What do we want people to be able to do?
We're so used to it. We've been brought up in a society where we don't feel comfortable to hug or touch.
Yeah, we don't.
Person. We just dared not. And now they've added it with this whole disease issue that I better definitely keep away. But your common sense and your logic should tell you otherwise. When your child is sick, your baby is sick, you don't isolate them. You hold them even more tightly.
Exactly.
And you try to comfort them, and you try to and a physical contact is so much needed. I remember there was a guy, again, he was a complete follower of the whole narrative, but because his brother had died, he really desperately needed a hug, and everything was overridden by his natural instinct, and said, "Please, can you give me a hug?" and just held him tightly. And so the one good thing is always that the true human nature is always there.
Yes.
And it will come out. And I think they can't fully override that as much as they try. It does come out. If you look now, they changed the nature of, let's say, the Japanese society where they all wear masks now.
Yeah.
But they haven't quite done it here. So now, by and large, no one's wearing a mask. I think they probably wanted people to wear masks more often, more readily. But that hasn't happened here. So that again shows the sort of spirit of common sense and humanity kind of comes through, and people realize what's right and what's not quite right when they take stock of things.
Yeah.
But again, it's just fear. I think fear, and when you're panicked and you're living in fear, and you're drummed all this brainwashing all the time, isn't it? The slogans and children have this from childhood now, is where they're just told all this stuff and made to almost memorize it without realizing it.
Yeah.
It does
and
become
not question.
And if they question things, they're told off, you see.
Yeah.
So we just don't give the space for children to question. And that's what education should be about, is to learn who you are through questioning, and then take your life forward to be able to do the best that you can, not do the best that the society wants you to do.
Yeah. And I think questioning is actually increasing now. I think one of the good things that this whole pandemic era has is that it has woken a lot of people up to what is going on. I mean, in every aspect of life. I mean, my particular interest is obviously with the medical side of it. And it's actually made a whole proportion of us, I don't know what that proportion is, maybe 20%, I don't know, actually start to question every aspect of medical information now.
Yes.
It's really made us start to dig deep. So hopefully this is the start of getting that information out, getting more doctors to actually think, am I doing the right thing?
Yes.
Have I harmed anyone? Do I need to relook at all these things all these protocols? I was listening to something on protocols the other day, I forget what it was, but they were talking about the fact that doctors just have protocols, and those protocols apply to everyone. It's not individualized medicine. This is the protocol for that. If they've got that, ignore everything else that they might have, or their emotional state, which is incredibly important, and just apply that protocol.
Yeah, they're not treating us they're treating us like a car or a machine.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're not. We're all so different. How you
Exactly.
respond to certain things is going to be so different to how I respond.
Yeah.
And we're just not treated as holistic beings. And I think we've got to take responsibility, and that's got to be nurtured from the childhood, that we take responsibility for our own health. And yes, there are doctors, but they're there as more like a facilitator to guide us, and we work together to rebuild our health. But it always starts with us, and I think we just got to encourage the children to spend more time in nature and a little bit of time to try to understand what's going on with them, without telephone, without smartphones, and without all the other distractions especially in the cities, I think, where things are pretty horrendous and everywhere's concreted and barred and fenced. And I even think that's by design. When you think about it, the fences are so metallic in the play areas now, really metallic, and bars everywhere. And you go to the pupil referral unit and the bars are even higher. And you think, this is not by accident. It all starts to look very sinister now, the way you see things. And there are, thankfully, as I said, there are really good people in all of these institutions, which is why this has not gone very far as they probably wanted it to go. In every terrible institution, there are good people. And you can see that, for example, where I live, they built some tennis courts for free. And also, obviously, we pay the tax as well. But but for the kids, it's great. And they've got basketball courts. And it's transformed that area. Lots of kids, not from the neighborhood, come there as well. And the local kids. And they're out playing basketball mainly. Tennis is a little bit more expensive, I think. But the basketball is great. It's just so nice to see kids out there playing and having fun and not on their phones as much. And that's some people's great idea in the council. So there are good people, and there's good doctors too, of course. And as I said, it's not the individual to blame. It's just the individual feels very helpless and sometimes tied up in this system, and many won't realise the sinister nature because you've got so many layers of bureaucracy that you can't quite, unless you're out of it, it's very hard to see when you're inside.
Yes,
it's like you need an aerial view, a bird's eye view, but when you're in it, you can't see the damage.
Because you're busy doing, aren't you?
Yeah. So it's just need a reevaluation. I mean, we can't change people, but what we can do is we could, as I think Gandhi said, you could be the change that you wish to see in the world. So be the example of what you want to see so that your kids can mimic and model, because your kids mimic you a lot, don't they, of how you are as a parent. And they don't let us spend much time with our children now. That's another
No, not unless you homeschool them.
Homeschool, which is, I think, a good thing. I think sadly it's tough as well, because you need children to interact with other children. But again, it shouldn't be with that they have to wear a uniform and lanyard and they've got to sit on a table for 7-8 hours a day with a book. And then I even heard the head of maths, who I thought he was passionate about maths. He said, if any kids ask you why we learn maths, just tell them it's so that they can follow instructions one by one. And you think, well, that's perfect for the corporation.
Wow.
It helps them to build how to follow instructions and do things methodically. And I thought, well, that sounds like something out of some kind of 1984.
Yeah.
It's quite horrifying, the memorizing of things and memorizing that. Just there's no point in that, for scientific subjects, you have to memorize equation. Well, when did this become a memory test? I mean,
well, it teaches us to follow without question, to treat all these leaders as gods.
Yes,
like you say,
put them on a pedestal when
they don't necessarily deserve it.
They don't deserve it. No one really should be. I mean, there's no person that's perfect. I mean, even our so-called prophets were flawed as well. It's just about not respect people if they've done something amazing. But don't then say that, revere them so that they're on a pedestal, no matter how many other terrible things they might have done. I remember thinking about that I'm sure it was Peter Hitchens, because for a while, he was quite revered as this outspoken character who was questioning the testing. He said, well, what kind of pandemic is this that you have to go and search and door to door to find sick people with a test? And then suddenly he went and got jabbed and said the war is lost.
Gosh.
And it's I still respect some of his views, because he said some good things, but people had really revered him, and they couldn't sort of accept that he might do this other thing that didn't sort of align with what they thought that he should do. And some people couldn't let go, so they still revered him all the time. But he shouldn't really be revering. We should we are all super people, and we just got to it's like all this the actual Marvel stuff. I think they're talking about us. We're sort of these people who think we're flawed, but we've got all these superpowers if we're allowed to realize telepathy and so many other things that you start to
everything that's been shut down, minimized, and
connection with the trees and how the trees actually communicate with each other and with us animals, because we know that animals see and have perception that's over quite a vast range. And they seem to be looking above, like a cat's looking above your head. It's not looking at you, it's seeing something, and you can't see it's not a fly either, it's something else. And I think we've probably got more that we can perceive. We just haven't, we've not been allowed to tap into it, I think.
Well, we've been distracted by too many other bright and shiny things.
Yes. And I think it's all deliberate.
Yeah, by design. Yeah. So what's next for you? What have you got anything else that you're planning on doing? So
I'll keep doing more testimonies, because people are coming forward with that, and there's so much more to explore. I want to look at testimonies of people who are doing things that could help offer alternatives, because I think what I've done now is highlight the problems, which is so important. And it's very easy for me to sit here and say, let's all keep away from the NHS, etc., or we've got to stop focusing, we're not going to get justice in that system or something. But I mean, if you're a traumatized person and you've suffered, I can't imagine what these people have. I never can imagine. I try to empathize, but I can't know what they've gone through. And they're seeking justice, or they're seeking the truth to come out, or they're warning people. There's so many, or some kind of closure. There's so many things that for them on their journey where they're going that you just got to respect. So that was the first thing, is to raise awareness, to make doctors, public aware of what's going on,
Mm.
anyone who can help, lawyers. So that obviously, mainly so this doesn't happen again. It's always to prevent as well, isn't it? But
Yeah.
also to give voice. But I'd like to move towards the directions as well where we look at the solutions. So if we're not going to go to the NHS, then where will we go and what can we
Yeah.
do? So yes, I was interviewing a gentleman who talks about the importance of oral health. And that's my next testimonial. So I'll keep doing that. And if a film opportunity arises, I may do that. So I've got something in the pipeline at the moment, which is looking at those who are getting jabbed,
Right.
who are vulnerable. So they're turning 18 and they haven't got the capacity, the state deems, to make a decision.
Right.
But then the state is deciding again who,
against
as we've
the
seen,
parents.
against the parents, especially with a jab that is not safe and not effective. So that's scary because then that sets this same precedent that they can do this again with other jabs that will be launched again and again, because they keep finding something, isn't it? Some new problem they create, and then they create some new solution, and then they keep forcing people to go down certain paths. And so there's that to look to. I think that's another potential project, but very difficult project because these people are scared, very afraid. They wouldn't do it the way that I did playing God, where they would come to camera and speak.
Yes, because they're still in the fight.
They're still in the fight, and even though some of them have got away and they haven't had their children forced jab, but they're scared they'll come back again if they're vocal. And some people have gagging orders, and some, as you said, ongoing cases. Some have got gagging orders apparently for life. So I don't know how, but this could happen. You know, there are people who have children. We've heard, for example, Down syndrome, and they will one day become adults, and they're scared about that future, and they want to prevent this and raise awareness. So we've got to find a way to tell that story. It may be a fictional. We do it in a way with actors, actresses, and make it into a film. So that's a next project for me. Yes.
Wow, amazing work. Absolutely essential to get that information out there. And with Playing God, you know, everyone needs to watch that.
Yeah, we have it's on Children's Health Defence and UK Column.
UK Column,
And we have if you want to see in person, we have a screening on the 7th of June at the Karma Sanctum Soho Hotel in London at 6 p.m. And that's important because there'll be some other like-minded people that you can meet, and also some of the members of who participate in the film, the contributors will be there as well. So there's a chance to meet. For example, I'm hoping that the lawyer who spoke in the film, Anna de Busseret, will be there, and Anne Dixon as well, and her husband Graham. I think they'll be there too. So it's a chance to hear what they have to say as well.
Brilliant. Well, we'll share that in our newsletter and
Thank you.
see if we can get more people watching it.
Thank you so much for giving me a chance to talk about this film. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing.
And
it's
you too.
Amazing.
What you're doing is absolutely remarkable and so important as well. So thank you.
Together we'll fix this.
We will. It doesn't take, it always takes one or a few.
Yeah, there's lots of people out there.
And now it's growing, exactly.
Yeah, we're creating hope.
We are.
Yeah, well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.